Our speaker today is Sarah Raposa. She is a guide and facilitator dedicated to creating safe, nurturing spaces for personal growth. With more than 23 years of experience in behavioral change and organizational culture, Sarah transitioned from a career in DC to independent work in Rappahannock in the healing energy of the Blue Ridge Mountains. In the words of Marianne Williamson, she believes that our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, but that we are powerful beyond measure. Sarah?
Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I'm a talker, so I'm going to set my timer to make sure I stayed at the 20 minutes. So if I'm looking at my phone, that's what it is. Well, I am very, very honored to be here. And thank you, Gary, for the support on the PowerPoint, and had no idea that you were also a beautiful voice. So I call this cacao curiosity. And really, for me, cacao has always been in my life. Little did I know that it was a journey. I think for many of us, we all enjoy a little delicious chocolate. For me, it was many years of always having a secret stash of chocolate at my cubicle, in my closet. Yes, a lot of us still do. And then it was about, so always just a deep romance, I will call it, love for chocolate. And it was about 3 years ago, and actually a member in your community, Ellen Adams, who introduced me to this idea of ceremonial cacao. And I heard that word, had no idea what it really meant, but I was just super curious. And I was like, that sounds amazing. At the time, I was doing some study of plant medicine here also in Rappahannock County through Green Comfort School of Medicine, and just aware that there's so many amazing allies out there in the plant world that can support us. So got very curious, went to a few more formal ceremonies with Ellen, and wow, the love just started to grow, the romance deepened. I quickly decided I wanted to become a practitioner as well, dove deep in. And I'll just say it's a journey because, and I hope it continues, I continually am awed by this plant and what it can do. And for me, it has been an ally in, well, absolutely my spiritual centering and presencing. Became a huge ally in opening up this creativity I had. I started to do art again. I actually have some art exhibited right now in Before and After Cafe that me and my daughter did together, with the root of it being in cacao. I use it for medicine for my daughter with her asthma. I discovered it was supporting me with my osteoporosis prevention. I'm in perimenopausal, so a lot of mood swings, a lot of cramping. It's been a huge ally, and I'm going to walk you through all of this so you can start to understand. And really, my hope is to just spark your own curiosity. And wherever you are on your journey, that it may continue today. So I feel like the appropriate place to start is always with the tree and where this plant comes from. And the miracle really process of cacao pollination. And it was the Greek root of the name is actually food for Brahma and God Theo, food of the gods. And they kept cacao from the indigenous Mesoamerican word for cacao, but it really is. And it starts with this very small spindly tree that only grows about up to 25 feet. There's actually one in the Botanic Gardens in DC that I used to frequent and visit. So small enough to fit into a Botanic Gardens. And the amazing thing is this tree grows about, the statistics vary, but somewhere between 6,000 to 10,000 up to 100,000 flowers a year. But these flowers are teeny. They're about 1 to 2 centimeters. And they're very, let's just say, protective of their pollination parts. So the flower petal actually curls over the male part. And these are the type of flowers that have, and trees that have both the male and female on the tree, but they cannot self-pollinate. So they need the pollen from another tree. So one creature in this world has been recruited, and it's a midget, a midget that is, they call it the the midget fly, and it is the size of a pinhead. And it takes anywhere, the flower is only alive for somewhere from 24 to about 48 hours. And if it's not pollinated, the plant dies. And there's 75 aromas that come from the flower to attract this midget fly. So even for a flower to get pollinated is a bit of a miracle. And the statistic is about only 10 to 20% of cacao flowers are actually successfully pollinated. And I think now you can appreciate why. And of those that pollinate, only about 1 to 2% grow into a mature fruit, which is the pod that we know. So, and in those so any tree will give about 20 to 40 pods a year. And there's about 20 to 60 beans in a pod, which, to put it into perspective, if you were to eat about 1 ounce of chocolate a day, which some say dark chocolate, that's like a recommended dose for getting some delicious benefits, you would consume the entire production of 2.5 trees, their entire production for a year. So just so much admiration, even just starting with the tree itself and what it takes to get to a little pod in our hand. So where does cacao grow in a brief history? So there's what's called the chocolate belt. It's about 20 degrees north and south of the equator. That's because of the hot and humid temperatures, pretty consistent, as well as the humidity and a lot of rainfall. So we'll do a very brief history tour. They always knew that the cacao tree was indigenous to the Americas. And for a very long time, it was thought that it was within Mesoamerica, at about dating 3,800 years ago. And they used theobromine found in, and we'll talk about theobromine later, in pottery, to kind of trace where it came from. And they found it in the pottery of the Olmecs, the Maya, the Toltecs, and the Aztecs. And it's usually found in ceremonial locations, used for rituals and rites of passage. Again, the food of the gods. And you'll learn it's a heart medicine. So a lot of these things around fertility, birth, marriage. But very recently, we discovered that the human love affair with cacao is much earlier and actually in Ecuador in the Amazon. So only within the past, I think, 5 to 7 years, they discovered pottery of the Mayo-Chinchipe culture, dating 5,300 years old. So that's nearly 1,500 years earlier than they thought. So Mesoamerica and the Mayans, a lot of time, that's what people think when they think cacao, but it actually started all the way in in Ecuador. How it made its way from Ecuador up all the way into Mesoamerica is still a big mystery, because the seeds have a very short life until their viability. So they think it might have been boats. There's lots of literature out there that they're still not quite sure. But let's fast forward, right? So we're talking 5,300 years ago to about the 1500s. So Columbus was introduced to cacao, and it was really the Spanish colonial expansion in Mesoamerica where cacao was discovered by the colonists. But they saw cacao as more prized and precious as opposed to very sacred. And so when they brought it over to Europe, they were very into the texture of it and the mouth and the smoothness. So that's really where chocolate started to become. So in Mesoamerica, it was very much still just consumed as cacao. And the chocolate industry really took off in Europe, again, looking for that smoothness, that texture. And of course, there was a dark side of colonialism in terms of what happened to the Mayan, a lot of the indigenous cultures. In the 16th century, that's where cacao really took off. It went to the Netherlands, it went to Italy. French royalty favored it as the drug of choice. Everybody really was tuning into the heart and the bliss and all the great chemicals that we get from cacao. Still booming throughout the 1800s. And that's where it was introduced as a crop plant into Africa and the Asian countries, because it had the perfect conditions for cultivation. And then it was in the 20th century where there was mass demands for cacao production. Over 70% today is in Africa, Western Africa, like the Ivory Coast and Ghana. And I'll just say a lot of slavery and child labor has been used to meet the demand. So that's why there's a lot of labeling out there around fair trade, etc. So that's a very quick history tour, but now we will go from pod to pleasure. And I'm going to share with you cacao processing And the first section of this is going to be through ceremonial cacao and how that's processed. And you'll just see how it's retained a lot of its purity. And that's really what ceremonial cacao is. It's nothing removed, nothing added. So how do we process it where we can consume it into our body? So I work with what a brand called 𝐒𝐚𝐫𝐽𝑒. So a lot of these images are from 𝐒𝐚𝐫𝐽𝑒, which is based in Guatemala. So first you start with the pods being harvested, and it takes several cacao harvests. It lasts several months. Pods ripen at different times, so it's a continual process of ripening and harvesting. And as you can see, depending on the genetics or the degree of ripeness, they range in this beautiful rainbow of colors, right? So you can have pods from yellow, green, orange, purple, maroon, just stunning, stunning fruit. And then the pulp is removed. The pulp is also referred to as the baba or the mucilage. And each tree has a unique pulp. They say sometimes even each pod has a unique pulp. And this is very important because the pulp is the start of the flavor of chocolate that you know and love. So what happens is the next step is fermentation. And that's when the flavor of chocolate begins, because again, the flavor is in the pulp, and fermentation dissolves the pulp into the bean. And so that's where the flavor, the quality, the final acidity of the chocolate, this is where it starts in the fermentation phase. And this is done, again, with ceremonial cacao, most of them very naturally. It's just aerated in boxes. They move it every few days and mix it, so there's no molding. This process also kills germs, and it's about 6 to 10 days. And then you have a wet bean and you need to get it dry. So that's where the drying happens. And again, with ceremonial cacao, it's usually done very gently out in the sun. Again, takes less than a week, and the moisture goes from 55 to about 7.5%. So that's when you get the bean that you can then, and this is the second stage of flavor, is the toasting, or sometimes referred to as lightly roasting. Sure.
That the pulp is scraped out and then it becomes a bean?
No, the pulp and the bean are together inside a pod, and the fermentation allows the bean to absorb a lot of the pulp. And so that's where the flavor is not in the bean. If you eat a raw bean, it tastes, they say, like a lychee fruit, like very bland, can kind of disrupt your stomach a little bit. I've tried one. I'll experiment on my stomach. Not much flavor at all. So that's where the flavor starts, is by absorbing it. But the bean is that's the cacao that you know. And we'll talk about how it gets even further into the cacao you know. So first is the toasting. And that's done mostly to, again, develop the flavor. It also reduces the acidity and further sterilizes the bean. A lot of literature will say this doesn't really, if it's done lightly and well, it doesn't affect the nutritional value, because it's the heat and the continual processing of the chocolate industry where you lose some of the nutrients. And a lot of times the color of the roasted bean will differ because of all the different things like temperature, air. So you'll see a variety of colors, again, a rainbow of roasted beans. Then the next stage is the peeling or it's sometimes called winnowing. And this is where you separate the shell. So you can see she's got the whole bean on the right to the nib, and the nib is the meat inside the bean. So that's the cocoa that you know, the mass of the cocoa. And again, it's hand peeled in a lot of companies that do work with ceremonial cacao, but in the chocolate industry, it's very many different ways where you get that nib, and it, the company to company, the integrity, how it's done. Sometimes there's government regulations. So just every step, how pure and preserved is the cacao you're having. It really is step by step. Then gets to the grinding, and that's where these nibs are passed through mills and it forms a paste, because basically it's just getting heated and pulverized. And that heat and the friction melts the cacao butter in the paste, which is about 50 to 60% of it. So you get this liquid. So cacao butter is part of the nib, as well as the cocoa meat, the mass. And then that's where they can work with it and pour it into molds. So I say there's beauty in every brick. I actually brought some bricks if people want to hold or look at. And as you can see, there's different coloring in that, and that really has to do mostly with variability in processing. And this is the purest form of cacao because nothing has been added and nothing has been taken out. So that is how ceremonial cacao is made. And I like to say that there's pleasure in every cup. And really, the pleasure is how you prepare it. So for me, to get to brick to beverage, some people will do mortar and pestle. Some people will cut it. I grind it. It's much easier in a spice grinder. And I like this as smooth of a texture as I can get for a drink. And you can add all sorts of honey, sweeteners. The cacao does not matter. It wants you to enjoy it. So adding all these things does not alter or change the cacao at all. There's a lot of people will say dairy is not something you want to mix with it. So if you're using a milk, it's like a non-dairy, but that's about it. The rest is make it your own. And so there are many forms to have cacao, and chocolate is what most people do now. So I wanted to walk through the final steps of making chocolate so you can understand the difference and where some of the nutrients might be changed. So the next step to get chocolate is what they do is they press the paste that you saw in the previous one. And what that does is it separates the cacao fat. And about 20% is retained, but the cacao fat and separating it out also, again, allows for a smoother texture to the mouth. And it also has a very high economic value. So once that got discovered for use in pharmaceuticals and cosmetics, a lot of chocolate companies will press it out and actually sell it. And then there are some other chocolate companies based on the quality and what they're trying to create that will add the cacao fat back in a later stage. But what's left is the cake when you press. Then there's the alkalization, and sometimes you'll see Dutch processing, and that's very optional. That's where you add in an alkaline compound. And again, it's just to reduce bitterness and develop flavor. And it also, they say, helps with solubility. Then the refining stage, that's when it's refined by adding. So that's where fats are added back in. A lot of times it is a dairy fat. Sometimes it's more cacao fat, the flavors, the sweeteners, vanilla, sugar, etc. So in chocolate, that's the refining stage. Then there's what's called conching, and that's where it's kneaded up to 7 days. If you ever see Charlie in the Chocolate Factory and these big wheels and the conching. So for 7 days, and that's where a lot of the smoothness comes. And sometimes additional things are added like cacao butter, lectin, and that will help to kind of eliminate any remaining bitterness, and also with the aerating. So again, processed for 7 days. And then the final stage is tempering, which is heated to a high temperature and then cooled. And what happens is it thickens the chocolate. And it also that's where you see that beautiful sheen and the snap of chocolate. It comes from tempering. And I've had from some of our local chocolatiers untempered and tempered chocolate. And I will say my tongue prefers tempered chocolate. It really is just smoother and has that beautiful shine. So my big thing with chocolate, and just if I pass on, is know your source, right? I mean, when I went through all those stages, there's so much variability in it. Obviously, a Hershey's to a local chocolatier is going to be incredibly different. So the best advice I can say is know your source. And I just had to give some homage to my beautiful chocolatiers in the county who I love. So I do love Wholehearted Chocolate, Keenan Sherwood and 𝐶𝐚𝐫𝐚, the woman Karen. She does bean to pod. They're both very careful about their sourcing, etc. So beautiful chocolates in the county. And the ceremonial cacao that I use is Keith's cacao. And Keith Wilson, it does not feel right to do a presentation and not share that he was dubbed the chocolate shaman and really discovered ceremonial cacao. And actually, he never copyrighted it, but he coined that word and he really brought it over to the Western world, or our Western cultures, I should say. And so he recently passed away this year, and it was a huge loss to the cacao community, but some say energetically he's doing more work with us. So anyway, Keith's Cacao, but there's so many cacao companies out there. So I'm not here to tout one, just again, know your source. And for me, the integrity of 𝐒𝐚𝐫𝐽 and where I became a practitioner is where I go. So, okay, now where the science meets the mysticism. And this is where, okay, we all eat cacao, we know it's delicious, but what is it doing to our body? Why do we feel that love, that bliss? And so that's what really getting into the bioactive chemicals that makes it the food of the gods, which I still think is amazing that 5,300 years ago, they were intuitively knew to go to this pod where now we have the science to dissect it and know why it does all these things. But it just still blows my mind how interconnected our ancestors and indigenous people are. Okay, so we will start with the nutrients. And if you Google lists, cacao will come up as one of the most nutrient dense foods on earth. It's up there with salmon, kale, etc. You can see all here. So I'm going to quickly just highlight some of the ones that it's the highest in. So magnesium, it's the highest plant-based source. And that has so many benefits, right? Mental clarity, stress, anxiety, bone and health support. That's where the osteoporosis prevention comes in. So high amounts of magnesium and stress, right? It's just like, our Epsom salt baths. So incredibly high. Iron, it's 4 times more than spinach, also the highest base source. Again, supports cognitive, immune system function, red blood cells, anemia. I mean, all the great things that iron does. Calcium, it's one of the highest plant-based, more than milk. I will say the bioavailability of a plant versus an animal-based calcium, I don't have enough of a degree to explain or know, but it's very high in plant-based calcium. And then 2 very important trace minerals are manganese, which is, I've learned, healthy for your skin, bones, and joints, and chromium, which is very good for balancing sugar and insulin use. Some people say it reduces sugar cravings. Then it's also high potassium, zinc, these trace amounts of vitamin A, B, E, K. I mean, it's unbelievable in one pod. So just the vitamin minerals alone, it's unbelievable. Then you get to the fancy word of polyphenol compounds, which is the antioxidants and anti-inflammatories. And often it's touted as 40 times higher than blueberries. And I put that chart there. Look, blueberries is like the 3rd, and look where all cacao is at the bottom. I mean, it blows it out of the water. So it is incredibly good. And if you know all the wonderful things, I mean, those are the heart, the brain, the anti-aging protectors, the antioxidants and the anti-inflammatories. And the combination of the magnesium and the flavonoids often attributes cacao to helping with type 2 diabetes and prevention. So just the alchemy, I mean, there's just so much in cacao. It's unbelievable. Okay, now the alkaloids, theobromine, right? What it was named after. This is where it's called the heart medicine. So theobromine, the alkaloids of a plant are the stimulants. They're the heavy hitters of a plant. So cacao has both theobromine and caffeine. But if you look at the ratios, this is a little hard to see. It's much higher in theobromine than caffeine, although every cacao is different. So some you could get that are higher in caffeine. But theobromine, the difference is it's a cardiovascular stimulant. Caffeine is a central nervous stimulant. So the cardiovascular stimulant opens up the heart. It allows more oxygen to flow, more blood to flow through. So this is where they call it the heart opener. And a lot of people, like athletes, will use theobromine for getting a bigger, oxygen boost when they're running. I use it for my daughter with her asthma. It's absolutely an amazing medicine when she's having asthma. I mean, theobromine is a gift of the gods. And while it is not only in cacao, you can see there's some teas and things that's in, it's the proportion, green tea has 1.2 milligrams. And cacao is somewhere up to like 400 milligrams. So you can find it in trace amounts in some other plants, but it is predominantly cacao, which is why they call it theobromine cacao. And the thing about that high level of your oxygen is the mood, the mental focus, boosts energy, and it lasts longer than caffeine. So a lot of people will have a caffeine crash. Theobromine lasts in your body for up to, like they say, almost 12 hours, where caffeine sometimes it's like 2 to 5 and then you crash. So a lot of people will use cacao to get off of caffeine. It's as an alternative. So you can see the ratios again. It does have caffeine, and every cacao is different. So again, know your source, look at your labels. I know I'm very sensitive to caffeine, so cacaos that are much higher in theobromine and lower to caffeine support me. And then lastly, the neurotransmitters. These are the mood enhancers. This is where cacao is called psychoactive, not psychedelic, right? So it doesn't change, but it works with chemicals that are naturally occurring in your body that are mood enhancers. So phenylethylamine is associated with love. That's the pleasure. That's the motivation. That's why you see all these movies, and we know, right? When we have chocolate, there is that connection to love. And phenylethylamine in turn releases norepinephrine and dopamine. So a lot of people will say it has this euphoric effect like runner's high, right? And it can help with depression, with attention, with weight loss. Then you mix it with anandamide, which they call is the bliss molecule. It's actually part of the cannabinoid system in your brain. So it targets the same structure as THC, which is the active ingredient in cannabis. And that's where you get that high, that kind of bliss. And then MAOI, which are, I'm just going to call them MAOI, it has a very long name. Those are neurotransmitter inhibitors. So what they do is they slow down of all these amazing things. So body, and it's the same thing with serotonin. But you longer last time, so it is a mood enhancer. And often people use cacao as a ramp off of antidepressants, of different drugs. So I will say, in terms of taking cacao responsibly, again, because it works with moods, some people say if you're on certain medicines, you do have to be aware because it's working with the same chemicals that antidepressants are. So you have to do a little homework on knowing your dosage and what's a safe amount to have. And out of this, we get heightened focus, creativity, so many amazing things that cacao offers. And then there's the energetic properties of cacao. And this is where the science really does meet the mystical, and it's almost the alchemy of everything I just talked about. So often when people use cacao in sacred space, in centering, in their own practices, it is that song. It's root to rise. It's very embodying. It gets you out of your head and into your heart and into your body. So for a lot of busy minds, right, it's very supportive, but all those mood enhancers, all those uppers and lifters, it also rises, right? So you're more expansive, you're more open. So it's so grounding while opening. It's an incredible ally. And I love to say it kind of meets you where I am. So in terms of the sorrows and the joys, I like to think it almost like softens your sorrows and amplifies your joy. Like it really is a great ally, a beautiful partner, and just an incredible medicine. And so I lived with a quote that from 𝐂𝐚𝐫𝐚 used to say, which is, it's never what you think it's about. And he talks about that more about what comes up when you're taking cacao, or when you're just with any emotions that are coming up. Often our emotions are telling us something else than we think. But I think it's the same with cacao, right? I came to it for spiritual, and then look at all these amazing benefits that I'm getting for my body and my family and my art. So, you know, what other, for me, plant has a list that long of what it could be and how it could support you. And yet, how it calls to individuals is unique, and what it's meant to do to support your body is unique. And is cacao for everybody? No, I'm not here to say it's the miracle thing that's going to solve everything and for everyone. But if you're called to it in any way, I guess I'm just here to encourage you to follow your curiosity, see where that leads you. And just to remember that there's an abundance of allies and partners out there in the plant world to support us. And you don't have to consume to commune, is what I say. So just working with the plants energetically, knowing they're out there, you can connect through your heart. There's some gorgeous support that comes from these plants.